Hey there, I'm Narumu. I play World of Warcraft and main a warrior named Crunch. In this video, I'm walking you through some steps, resources, and tools you can use to get better at whatever World of Warcraft class and spec you happen to be playing. World of Warcraft is a pretty old game full of players doing everything they can to be the best possible versions of themselves. Thanks to the wonders of the internet, a passionate player base, and some incredible developers, there are all kinds of tools that gather and compile huge amounts of data to help you show how to get good. There are two major sections to this video, and additional breakdowns within each. The first section is about your build, which includes your class, specialization, talents, and gear. The second section is about your actions, things like encounter mechanics, ability rotations, cooldowns, and combat logs. I'm not going to be going through every class or spec individually. I'm not going to be covering what class is good or not right now. I'm not giving you the boss guides to whatever the current season's challenges are. This guide is meant for everyone, including the folks just getting started with the World of Warcraft endgame, and those trying to understand why you just got benched for Mythic Prog. Your class is one of the first things that you pick in this game. The specializations come soon after. Get to know your class and your specialization. Knowing what your class and spec brings to the table is, in my opinion, about 80% of what it takes to do well in endgame content. Every class and spec is viable for all endgame content, and each of them brings something different to a group. Every class has unique buffs and abilities that promote filling out groups with as much diversity as possible in order to boost overall team performance beyond just the tanking, healing, and damage individually done. For example, warriors can buff the group's attack power and they have fast, reliable battlefield mobility to catch mechanics. Mages buff the group's intellect stat, can remove curses, and can go fully immune to nullify something targeted on them. Knowing that you can do these things can really make or break a fight, especially at higher difficulty levels. In smaller groups like dungeons, delves, or arena, it becomes even more important to know what your class can do in order to handle as much of what's thrown at you as possible, and how to best manage what's missing. Want to know the best way to learn what your class can do is? Log in onto your character, open your spellbook, default keybind is P in-game, make sure the Hide Passives option under the little gear icon is unchecked, then place your cursor over your abilities to see the tooltips and read. You'd be surprised how far you can get without actually knowing what everything is actually doing, and how much better you could be doing if you did. Here are some random picks that may not seem obvious to new players that are part of the ability descriptions, and I may have directly seen experienced players not know about despite just getting their 3K Mythic rating. When a druid shapeshifts into a different form, they clear any roots, snares, and movement slowing effects from themselves. Every single form change ability tells you this. A warrior's spell reflection ability, besides doing its namesake of reflecting targeted spells, will also reduce all magic damage taken by 20% for 5 seconds, so it's still useful for reducing the area of effect damage of many abilities. The Death Knight ability Death's Advance also passively prevents you from being slowed to less than 70% movement speed at all times, along with its active speed boost and knockback prevention effects when used. Be sure to read the class section as well as the specializations section. While you're at it, go check on the general tab too for your racial abilities and features. And to go even further beyond reading the spellbook, you can also look into resources such as the class guides available on Wowhead or Icy Veins, or your favorite class communities or content creators, in order to get some additional insights from other sources. But before you do, we should talk about talents. Talents are the part that really makes the build feel buildable. Every class and specialization has some talent trees that you can allocate points into from top to bottom. There's a class tree, a specialization tree, and the World Soul Saga introduced hero talent trees. The class tree carries most of the generic abilities available to the whole class, with some small adjustments based on your specialization. The specialization tree holds the core dynamic parts of your main gameplay and ability rotation of that spec. Hero talents primarily add another layer of functionality to one or more abilities, changing up some focus and options for a particular specialization. Most of the combat power in your talent build comes from synergies, stacking power onto your main abilities, or picking things that help supplement or fill in for other abilities. Learning and navigating what all of those options are requires a fairly significant amount of time, practice, and study. Luckily, there are people who have done that, wrote their own guides about it, and collected data to prove it. You can always check out the previously mentioned class or spec guides and communities for those, but I want to specifically highlight the talent information available on Archon and Raider.io. I love data, and this whole video is actually just a way for me to express that. Archon and Raider.io talent builds use combat log and content clearing data from real actual players doing the content to compile impressive sets of information to help you know more about what talents to pick, plus a ton of other things, but I'll be going over some of that later. Both talent resources have some similar user interface features to find your class and your spec. I'll be using Fury Warrior as a reference here. My examples in this video are from Midnight Season 1, but the guidance should remain relevant at other times as long as these tools are being used and work correctly. Though Raider.io talent builds are a new and beta feature at the time of this video's production. Once you've picked your class and spec, you'll want to direct your attention to the page navigation and filter options to ensure you're looking at the content most relevant to your endgame experience. If you're trying to pick your talents for the heroic raid, you probably don't want to be reviewing the best Mythic plus dungeon builds, as talent choices could be rather different between the two. The difference in group sizes, encounter length, and specific mechanics can drastically adjust how you're setting yourself up. Once your filters are correct, look to the talent tree. You'll see information on the most popular talent builds, largely based on the highest performing records Archon or Raider.io have access to, including references to peak examples, some links to the best Warcraft logs run or Raider.io POV video of that run, and some info on just how popular that build may be. Near the talent tree view, you can find some alternative talent options showing what talents are exchanged for others, how popular that build is, and some potential performance stats based on each site's records. Many of the alternative options are often tweaks for specific affixes or dungeons that might value more interrupts, or for certain groups that need a particular feature filled in. All in all though, the most popular build is a great starting point if you're unsure of what to go with. And you can make tweaks based on your group composition, personal ability, or interest from there. Oh, and much like the spellbook earlier, read your chosen talents. Get to know what they do. For talking about gear and equipment, I'm going to focus on the Archon resource. Earlier, you might have noticed that there's a section near the Archon talents that are showing an order of stats for the spec. Typically, your main or primary stat is going to be the most important, and everyone benefits from the secondary stats, haste, mastery, critical strike, and versatility, but not all of the specs benefit from them in the same way or at the same rate. Some characters benefit from more haste because it helps them generate the resources necessary to keep using their abilities, while others instead need the spending of their class resources to be more impactful through their mastery or crit. The thing is, though, there's a lot of math to the secondary stat system that makes it one of the most complex aspects of improving your build. Items, buffs, passive abilities, potions, flasks, and encounter mechanics provide a stat rating value that translates into a percentage at different rates depending on your spec, particularly for mastery, and those percentages have diminishing returns as you put more and more stat rating into them, both by game design and by how additive and multiplicative values work. It gets messy, and that kind of math can be hard to follow for some. But with enough log data of actual encounters and content clearing, combinations of that data can lead to patterns of what is likely the best. Also, though, it's super important to know that the data shown on Archon is also based on popularity, which means it's influenced by what's common, not exactly by what's best. These popularity-based gear lists often closely reflect what is found through class guides on Icy Veins and Wowhead, but at times it may conflict with the Best in Slot, also known as BIS gear lists, for a few reasons. Many Best in Slot lists from guide writers come from simulated and theoretical data and often includes items that most people aren't even able to get in a given season. And if you're like me, you might not have all of the gear that makes up that perfect stat balance because, well, drops are random and RNG is often fickle and cruel. However, the data on Archon can be a sort of guiding star to help you navigate there, helping you with a list of items that you may want to try and target farm, or perhaps something you can have crafted in its place. You can see some additional popular high-performing options for each slot by clicking the View All Gear options to the right of the Gear Overview heading. The other problem with both the best in slot list of theoretical class guides and the amalgamation of the most popular gear as seen on Archon is that it's not going to be representative of what the best you can or are willing to obtain. For that, there's simulation craft, the thing people are referring to when they say, quote, just sim it, when someone asks which item is better. Simulation Craft is an incredible project upheld by some incredible developers and theory crafters for the kinds of testing necessary to create some of those class guides and best in slot lists. It's also the perfect example of optimizing the fun out of a game, as it is a tool that runs simulated versions of WoW combat encounters, letting you tweak every specific part of your character or encounter along the way without actually having to play the game. In general, Simulation Craft isn't what you're typically going to use directly for simming things. Instead, you'll want to install the Simulation Craft add-on, log into your character that you're working on, open the add-on from the button or typing /simc, and then just copying all that text in the window that pops up. If you're playing a DPS spec, you'll want to head over to raidbots.com to paste all of that text. Raidbots is a very friendly interface for running these sims for different purposes like comparing gear or talents. It has some pre-made settings for different kinds of encounters to test with. Raidbots is also supplying the hardware to run thousands of simulations at a time, because much like all of the player data collection that goes into Archon or Raider.io's tools, more examples usually means better accuracy. You can use top gear to test to see if an item in your bag or your Great Vaults is better than what you have equipped, or to work out what gem and enchant combination is the best for you. The Droptimizer can help you identify what dungeons or raid bosses you should be targeting, and the Quick Sim can get you a rough idea of what kind of damage you can theoretically do in certain situations, depending on the simulation options you choose. If you're a healer, you can import that Simulation Craft string into QE Live at questionablyepic.com. This is an interface for Simulation Craft tools focused on healer performance. It provides ways of seeing what is some of the best gear in your bags, show you what equipment you should be trying to get from dungeons and raids, and some other data to help you have the best equipment possible. If you're playing a tank, you'll mostly be doing DPS simulations on raid bots to help with that, as there's no great way to properly test survivability. Like optimal healing performance, tank survival is more closely tied to knowledge of the encounter and reactivity using abilities and cooldowns at the right time. So let's start talking about your actions. You've read the abilities, you've picked your talents, and you know what gear to be pursuing. And now it's time to review how you're actually doing in those endgame encounters. Warcraft Logs is the core to Archon and some other analytics tools to help you learn how you're doing in raids and dungeons. It's primarily a resource that can collect and organize your combat logs. For the most part, it will track and store data from current expansion, raid bosses, and Mythic Plus dungeons. At least it's doing that if you or someone in your group is collecting that data and uploading it to Warcraft Logs. For the best analysis and self-reflection, you'll want to have logs of yourself. You may need to set up an account and use one of the Archon apps to upload your combat log data. Personally, I recommend using the Archon Lite app that exclusively processes and uploads log data. At the time of this video, you can find the Lite version quietly linked below the download button at the bottom of Archon's app download page and on GitHub. I'll link both in the description. You can upload logs as personal logs, which are just tied to your account but can be made public or kept private. Alternatively, you or your guild leader can tie in your guild into Warcraft Logs and give permissions for you and others to upload logs for your guild raid nights or other content that you're running together. I'm just focusing on personal performance reviews, so we're going to skip most of the guild management features in Warcraft Logs. Once you have an encounter log that includes you in it, whether you uploaded it or someone else did, open it up and let's dive in. For this guide, I'm using a report from Mythic Rotmire in Midnight Season 1 that I've linked in the description. You can follow along with either this example or your own preferred report. If you're using a raid log, it should look something like this, depending on your group's progress and what was cleared this raid night. From there, click into one of your completed encounters to get a summary view of all of the combat data for that encounter. In my example, I pulled up the Rotmire Mythic option from the linked example report. Now, there's a lot of information happening here. I will be using damage done and DPS characters for the explanation and examples here, but much of this process is also suitable for healers and tanks, just with some different information and different sections to review. Use the reports navigation near the top middle of the tables and charts section. We'll be going to the damage done section, which should lead you to something like this. There is a lot of information being presented on the table here, and I'm just going to be highlighting some of the quick and most notable points of them. The parse percentage is a percentile ranking measurement based on your specialization in that particular fight. Basically, it's a ranking of how you did compared to every other logged player of that class and spec in that fight at that difficulty across all of the Warcraft logs data. 50% range means average. The higher percentage, the better. The lower the percentage, the worse. So if you're seeing 90+% here, you did some of the best numbers for that spec in that fight at that difficulty. There's also a color code to quickly identify how someone might be performing on that metric. Gray is poor, green is below average, blue is good, purple is great, orange is for outstanding, pink is for exceptional, and yellow is for the absolute best. The amount is just the amount of total throughput done in the encounter in question by your abilities. That's damage done in this example. The eye level percentage is extremely similar to the earlier mentioned parts percentage, except it's also compared against other players of your spec in that fight that are within one average item level of you in this logged data. So, if you're playing an enhancement shaman with an average item level of 291, then the eye level percentage will be comparing you to other enhancement shamans with an average item level of 290 to 292. This value is typically more important to consider than parse percentage because it helps normalize your performance based on the power of your gear, since typically stronger gear can mean better parses, and you just may not have that gear yet. The active value is a rough tracker of just how active you were during the encounter. Activity is measured by doing literally anything, including moving, casting, using abilities. For most cases, more activity is good. It's also very important to know what this information is not saying. It's not a measurement of how you are as a player, a character, or your role or your spec. The information here is just presented around a specific metric for a specific version of a specific fight. It is so important to keep in mind that there are many, many reasons that your numbers in a specific report may be very high or very low compared to others in this data, and much of it is not necessarily in your control. Here are some things that may impact your combat data that you typically cannot control. Fight strategies that your group is using. The number of times you were the target of certain mechanics. Whether or not your group has synergistic group buffs, like Arcane Intellect is not very useful for a warrior, though Monk's Mystic Touch is. Whether or not you sneezed at a critical moment. Whether or not someone else disconnected during the fight, but you still won. It's super important to be mindful of what went on in a fight when you're analyzing one specific fight. However, with enough data and enough examples, you can build a pattern to your own performance. If you're consistently seeing yourself having a gray-colored eye level parse on multiple fights across multiple raids or dungeons, then it's likely you may be doing something in your actions that could be improved upon. Ideally, you should have an idea of how your class and specs rotation and cooldowns work by the time you're doing content that you're tracking logs for, but with some things like the single button assistant and assisted highlight, you can get quite far without ever really learning the steps. Once you have some logs to review, you can analyze your rotation and cooldown performance with some encounters in a couple of ways. WoW Analyzer will let you load up a Warcraft logs report and then provide a handful of recommendations for your class or spec in a particular fight, based on simulation profiles and the knowledge of specific people who maintain profiles for specific specializations. If you want to see an example, you can review the example Warcraft logs report in WoW Analyzer. It's worth noting, though, that not all specs are kept up to date and maintained within WoW Analyzer, so your mileage may vary. Whether or not your spec profile is maintained on WoW Analyzer, you can always just use the compare function on Warcraft logs instead. This lets you compare yourself to similar characters in similar encounters to see what you might be doing right or wrong. I'm jumping back into that Mythic Rotmeyer Warcraft logs report again. Once you're in your report, click Compare in the upper right side of the report's navigation. That should show you something like this. What I find to be the most useful is that last section that allows you to search for parses similar to your own. Select yourself or whoever you're reviewing from the Select Player dropdown, and then you can usually keep the rest of the options as they are by default. That default setup is to look for other characters in your spec that did the same encounter within 10 seconds of your encounter length, with a raid size plus or minus 2 players of your own raid group size, within 2 item levels of you from the last month worth of data, because anything older may have been tuned quite a bit differently through hotfixes. For the metric choice, feel free to leave it as default or select the metric you're most concerned about. Default should pick the most relevant option for your selected player's role. Then hit search and get a result of up to 50 top performing logged characters that are at least somewhat matched to your chosen player from that report. From this list of results, I generally recommend picking someone that is listed as a higher rank and or has a higher metric than yourself, DPS in this case. The match value is tied into just how similar your character build is to theirs, like specific gear, talents, and trinkets. I like to pick a match percentage of at least 70% if possible. That'll give you a solid comparison for how you're doing versus how you could potentially be doing. Do try to match up the trinkets as best you can. This should be in part covered by that match percentage recommendation, but not always. The different trinkets alone can swing the data by like 5 to 10% depending on the season, so it's worth being attentive to. If you're seeing that you're not anywhere close in the match percentage to anyone in these results, while also being lower on the metric you're comparing to, then you likely have something substantially different in your build that's causing that gap. But once you pick someone to compare with, just click the name and you should get a screen similar to this. In this side-by-side view, you can see ability usage and the output it's doing compared to the probably better performing person you're up against. In this damage done example for a Fury Warrior, you can compare the amount of times certain abilities were used and how much damage they did per hit and overall. This information can be very revealing if you have a core difficulty with your rotation. You can then jump around to the different report navigation tabs. The summary section can be very handy to see if you have any differences in talent selection, stat distribution, and gear that might be worth considering. Casts is a good way to see that you have your rotation and ability priority in the right place. You can also see a timeline of when abilities were used across the encounter, which can help further clarify key use moments, especially for things like cooldowns or rotation ability priority. Buffs is another useful tab, allowing you to check against any notable buff usage like power infusion, throwing things off between you and your comparison, also with the timeline to help see when those buffs are happening for that fight. This is especially useful for tracking the use of defensives or utility abilities both by and on that character. Now, in a theoretical world, you'd be doing perfect rotations with perfect activity time doing peak damage. But Mythic plus dungeons and raid bosses are not those nice theoretical worlds. It's not as easy to keep up a rotation with all of the moving around for mechanics, pacing of enemy packs being pulled, and affixes that might be going off. Additionally, it might not even be optimal for you to be using your abilities and cooldowns as soon as they're available due to some of those mechanics. That's where learning the fight or the dungeon comes into play. If you know you're about to spend time running an ability away from the boss in the raid group, it's likely not the best time to use your cooldowns as a melee DPS. If a huge burst of AoE damage is about to come out, you should probably be timing your defensive or healing cooldowns to be ready for that big hit, like using a shield just before the hit, or pressing the huge group heal button immediately after. Just like blaming your teammates, you can't use encounter mechanics as an excuse every time. Doing well in that fight is partly about keeping up your rotation and ability use while managing what the fight is throwing at you. Utilize the adventure guide or dungeon journal in-game, default hotkey Shift J, and read. Most boss abilities and dungeon affixes are in there. There are a slew of in-game features to help visualize and alert you to what's happening in Encounter too. You can watch my visual mechanics guide video, which covers a large chunk of mechanics in the game based on what they look like. For a deeper look at the specifics of your attempts, you can take a look at Wipefest, which is another Warcraft Logs fueled tool. The overall UI is fairly straightforward. Put in your Warcraft Logs report, choose an encounter, and see a group-wide breakdown of what went well and what needs improvement in relation to the boss mechanics and raid setup. You can click into any section of the Wipefest report to see specifics about affected players and details into what happened there. Beyond that, it's about being aware and being attentive to you and your group's overall performance. You can use the various Warcraft log report sections and their timelines to get a sense of what was happening when, but it can feel meticulous to dig through manually. However, you can see when a boss ability goes off, then compare that moment in the timeline to say how you or everyone are using their personal defensives like they should be. I'd also like to give a special shout out to the replay option in Warcraft logs in the upper right corner of a report near the previously mentioned compare feature. It generates a little map view video of your raid group's encounter, including positioning and most mechanics based on the report log. And well, that's all I have for you for now. There are a ton of other features in Warcraft logs and Raider.io and other related tools to drill down into the nitty-gritty with. There are all kinds of fancy filtering you can do with these tools, but hopefully this video gets you rolling with your own log reviews instead of depending on someone else to do it for you. To close, World of Warcraft is a huge game and can be really complex to learn and master, but thanks to helpful APIs, combat logging, some really dedicated developers, and community-generated information, there are a lot of ways we can learn to be our best. It just takes a bit of time, learning, and personal responsibility to improve our collective and individual experiences in these endgame activities. And before you know it, you'll be pounding on the door of those cutting-edge achievements and chasing after those last couple of bits of rating before the season ends. If you enjoyed this content, please like, comment, share, subscribe, and be kind to each other, and be kind to yourself. Everyone learns something for the first time at some point. Again, I'm Narumu. Thanks for your time and energy. See you next time.